Good morning.
Good morning.
It is certainly nice to be with you today. We certainly have had our share of rain the last day, but we know that our green comes from that rain. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living. On its surface, this quote might imply that for some, life may not be worth living. As true students, we know that this is not true, and actually it's my own belief that how some have interpreted this quote from Socrates is probably not accurate either. Life is indeed a gift. We are part of the great universe of life, and in fact, what I think Socrates meant in his quote is that we need to live life consciously. Think about this for a moment. Of all the living beings on this planet, those of us that are on this human journey are probably the only ones that really have an opportunity to reflect and think about the experiences that they've had in life. Each of us that are probably here in this church this morning have examined some aspect of our life at one time or another. That is probably why we are here. I know I can say that I am here after having an opportunity to examine my life and where it was going, and that ultimately led me to becoming part of the Unity journey. There's a few of us here that have been sort of lifetime Unity students or close to lifetime Unity students, and those of you are extremely fortunate that you've had that opportunity. But even those of you that have had a lifetime of experience in Unity realize that we constantly have to keep reflecting to see where our life is going and what actions that we need to be taking in our life as well. We are awake spiritually to not only receiving our own good, but making decisions toward others and all of living creation, including our planet. And a lot of times it's very easy not to live a life consciously. In our message this morning, we are going to talk a little bit about how we can approach life in a more conscious and a more reflective way. In our message this morning, we're going to consider how to treat others the way we want to be treated, how to live ethically, and lastly, how to act in a socially responsible way that benefits all of life, and that includes every living thing and being on our planet, as well as being good stewards of the planet that we live on as well. In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus gave the classic admonition that became known as the Golden Rule, and I'll share that with you again. And that's at Matthew 7 and verse 12. There, Jesus said, "So whatever you wish that men would do to you, do so to them, for this is the law and the prophets." In a past message, I had shared with you that a more contemporary way to consider how to treat others is to apply what is known as the Platinum Rule. The Platinum Rule states we should treat others the way they want to be treated. When you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Can you imagine being taken out to dinner by somebody for a treat, and they order the dinner for you? They order for you what they like to eat, not necessarily what you want to eat. And I have heard stories of some people that actually do that, but I'm not necessarily saying that's the best way to treat another. You honor another by treating them the way they can appreciate. The way they can appreciate life is the way you want to treat them. In living the examined life, it is good to reflect on how we treat others. And regardless if we apply the Golden Rule or whether we apply the Platinum Rule, we certainly are going to have a better relationship with others if we think about this deeply. When we are driving, are we courteous? if someone wants to get into our lane, do we allow them to do so? That might seem like such a small thing. But yet it's small things like that that cause us to be able to create a better planet and a better environment to live on. How do we treat the cashier at the grocery store or the waitress at the restaurant? I remember about 5 years ago, I had gone on a cruise up to Alaska, and we had stopped at a little gift shop in Juneau, and I had, bought some souvenirs and some things from Alaska that I wanted to take back to Ohio, and it probably cost about $20 or so. And I probably had $2 or $3 in change coming back, whatever I gave the cashier. She gave me back $88 in change. From a standpoint of wanting to treat someone in a loving way, and also in an ethical way, which we're going to talk about, I certainly felt an obligation to give that $88 back. And that is the way we need to approach life too. All of us at times probably have little bloopers that occur in our life. And we need to treat somebody in a loving way. How do we like to be treated at work? Do we like good service? How do we show appreciation for someone that gives us good service? Of course, when we go to a restaurant, we want to provide a healthy tip if we receive good service. Our response can be also as simple as a thank you, or if somebody regularly serves us, possibly the person that delivers our morning newspaper, maybe we give them a holiday card or a small gift. It's these little things that on the surface don't seem to mean a lot, but do we think about that? Do we think about that as we interact with people, even with people that we may not have a close relationship with? Because that's really what love is all about. We can show love towards someone even if we don't really have a personal relationship with them. Sometimes we need to focus on those that are also in our life. And in some ways, this can be even more challenging, especially when we might have a challenging relative in our life. And certainly this love can be shown toward a spouse, children, or a parent. It can be easy to overlook a loved one. It can be easy to take someone for granted. Maybe we can surprise a loved one with a small gift. Maybe we can take a loved one or even a friend out to dinner. A life that we are constantly examining means we are looking for opportunities to show love to others. Most of us come here because we want to remember that at our core we are love, and that the core teachings of unity and also the core spiritual teachings of all the major spiritual traditions are love. I think I've shared with some of you, probably from the platform as well as in some personal conversations, that I teach ethics at the college that I teach at. And as I was preparing this message, I was thinking about some of the things that I thought about with regard to ethics. A lot of times when we think about ethics, we think of organizations, we think about government, we think of various institutions that provide services toward people. But individually, we need to live ethically as well too. Because everything starts really at the ground level, and that ground level begins with each and every one of us. At times we are too concerned about rules and regulations that govern life. These may be laws that govern our country and state, or rules that govern the workplace. And that is not to say that these are not important and that we shouldn't obey these laws. But actually, living an ethical life is really a life where you are raising the bar. Because think about it. Think about laws in our own country and in other countries. At one time, segregation was the law of the land in this country. It was legal, but was it ethical? No. How about Nazi Germany? Persecuting people of Jewish and other backgrounds was legal, but was it ethical? No. So acting ethically actually raises our standard of conduct. And at times, being ethical sometimes requires us to go against the grain and do things that are not necessarily socially acceptable. Many religions are governed by various rules of conduct, but at times, the study and practice of ethical living is far more important. The Bible speaks of this at Romans 2 and verse 15. They show that what the law requires is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or perhaps excuse them. So in a sense, acting ethically is having the law of love, the law of God, actually written on our hearts. We don't need something to be in some law book out there to know what is right or wrong. That is undoubtedly some of the conflict that occurred when Jesus was dealing with the Pharisees during his ministry on this earth. The Pharisees were concerned a lot about what the rules and regulations of their religious tradition was. Jesus was more worried about what the law of the heart was. And that law of the heart is expressing love. Because when Jesus was asked what the two greatest commandments is, he basically said, loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. So love is the key to anything we do, including the key to living an ethical life. And we can live that ethical life whether we are dealing with our family, with our friends, whether we are working, or whether we're serving in a church like this. As we live our life, it is important that we focus on the right thing to do, not necessarily what some rule or regulation might say. For the only law of God is really, as I mentioned before, is to love our higher power and others. This is really the only law we need to practice in our lives. If we live those two admonitions, our life is going to be a rich life. This law or ethical way of living helps us determine what is the right path to follow to. Because ethics also involves making right decisions. Each and every one of us, every day of the year, are confronted with many different decisions that we have to make. All of you are here this morning because you made a decision. And some of you may have rather have slept in, but you didn't. And you did it because you knew there was a benefit to coming this morning for fellowship, for hearing the message, for interacting with one another. In the past, it was not uncommon to see a bumper sticker on a car that would have the initials, and I think once in a while you'll still see these around. WWJD. What would Jesus do? And even though that bumper sticker was put together by our evangelical friends, it still is something that we can benefit from as well too, because Jesus is our way shower, and Jesus showed the way to live an ethical life. As we know, Jesus' ministry was a message of love. Jesus emphasized doing the right thing, not worrying about the religious leaders of his day and the many rules they asked that those they led follow. And it is interesting to note, as we will talk a little bit about in Unity, we have principles that we follow, but those principles are applied in such a way that they are applied to the circumstances in our life. All of us are confronted with important decisions. Those decisions must come from a place of love. Love is one of the few bedrock principles that govern the way that we live our lives. More and more business schools around the country are teaching the importance of ethical decision making. And isn't it really about time? Because ethics in business schools really didn't start to be taught until the scandal with Enron occurred back in the early, like 2001, whenever that occurred. And even though there was some discussion of it, but now we see the importance of teaching ethics to people that are working, people that are participating in the business world. What is ethical decision making? And in particular, what is ethics? Some might ask that. I've already indicated that ethics, in a sense, is a higher standard of behavior than actually obeying the law. Ethics can be defined as moral principles that govern a person's or a group's behavior. So it is just as applicable to each and every one of us here as it is to any organization, and even to this church for that matter. Every one of us are affected by ethics. Religion and spiritual groups have been in the forefront developing principles that allow us to decide what is ethical and what is not. And that has been one of the major contributions that religion has made to society, to consider ethical principles. And when I was preparing this message, I was thinking, well, why would anybody be interested in what Socrates or Plato or what a lot of these ancient Greek philosophers have to say? Well, the foundation for considering the kind of life we are to live has been an issue, has been in the forefront of what's on people's minds since ancient days. And it continues to be so, even to this day. And I'm sure every one of us in this room here, at one time or another, have struggled or wrangled with a issue and how to deal with it. One form of ethics emphasizes the need to develop principles that can be applied to a situation every time. And when I teach this in my ethics class, I think, how can you really apply only one principle the same way in every given situation when the circumstances of people's lives are different? And yet, there's an ethical school of thought that actually says that. And that is not to say that we shouldn't have some guidance. But can you unilaterally say that every single time, this is how you should act? I think we can safely say that in Unity we have developed spiritual principles for application on this life journey. But we can honestly say that Unity's principles are very flexible. A lot of people are actually very attracted to Unity as a spiritual way of living because we don't have the numerous rules and regulations that some other spiritual and religious traditions have. Those principles are meant to be used in conjunction with the law of love. That is not to say that sometimes people can, even in Unity, apply spiritual principles in a dogmatic way. I'm sure Alice could attest with the Course in Miracles. I certainly have met people, which is a wonderful spiritual teaching, A Course in Miracles. But by the same token, just as we have, our evangelical friends have a view that there's only one interpretation, so our friends that study A Course in Miracles, some of them also have that as well too. So it's important for us to be flexible and to apply the flexibility of the spiritual principles we are living to our own personal circumstances. And we really don't have that right to judge someone else if they make a different application of those principles. When we decide on being generous to another, starting a conversation to reconcile our differences with another, or even if we are in a position of responsibility, such as a manager or a boss, whether we should let an employee go because of poor performance, these are things that we need to think about, to reflect on, to examine. That is not to say that having to terminate someone's employment is the wrong thing to do. But it depends upon coming from the right place. If our desire to end, for example, an employment relationship is that the person is not working out because they have some other higher calling they haven't found yet, then we're coming from a place of love. But if we're coming from, this person really ticks me off and I'm going to get rid of them, that's another story. So we need to come from a place of love. We got to examine the motivations that are underlying what we are doing. We also got to ask ourselves, with regard to any decision, whether our decision is consistent with God's law of love. As the first unity principle states, God is absolute good and everywhere present. And of course, if you want a reminder of what it looked like, and if you're close enough and can see them, they're up on the wall to my right. The second principle goes, we have a spark of divinity within. Our very essence is of God, and we are therefore inherently good. So no, we know we have the capacity within each and every one of us to recognize that regardless of what decision is made, God is present within each and every decision. But because within each one of us is the inherent goodness of God, we also have that capacity to make loving decisions. Decisions that are not only for our benefit, but for the benefits of all those around us. Our very essence is of God, and we are therefore inherently good. I mentioned one ethical school of thought which basically says, have one principle that deals with every situation and you consistently apply that time and again. There's a third school of ethical thought that I sort of gravitate more toward, and probably because when I teach ethics, I'm usually teaching nurses. It's called a care-based form of ethics. How does this affect someone else? It's not just about us. It's not just about us. I remember once, years ago, before I got on the Unity path, and I had been doing some of my own recovery work, I remember agreeing to meet a gentleman for lunch. He didn't show up. And later on I called him and asked what happened. Did his car break down? Did he get sick? What happened? Oh, I just was taking care of myself. Well, I was holding in my inner anger. But that's an example of not showing concern or care for someone else. Just because we do have to work on ourselves does not mean we hurt someone else in that process as well too. So we need to show concern and care about others. I can honestly tell all of you that are not on this church's board that this church's board really is concerned about the welfare of each and every person, because decisions that are made can impact other people in this spiritual community. As spiritual beings that are divine, then we need to examine our lives and decisions and see whether we are manifesting God's good in every decision we make. The final area we're going to talk about this morning is living a socially responsible life. The term social responsibility is another one that a lot of times applies to organizational or business ethics, or sometimes even government ethics as well too. But it can apply to us as individuals too, whether or not we are socially responsible. It's important we examine our lives in relationship to every living person and creature on this planet. So our social responsibility goes beyond just living human beings. I hear a bird, I believe, chirping out there. We have a responsibility to that bird. We have a responsibility to these trees and the grass and the various plant life that's on our grounds and on the grounds of our homes as well too. We can even go further than that in thinking that we must be good stewards of this planet. For indeed, as co-creators with God, we are responsible for a peaceful and sustainable planet. The Bible likewise entrusted us with the responsibility of caring for planet Earth and all living creatures on it. And I'm going to share a scripture actually from the first book of the Bible, Genesis 1:28. And there was written, "And God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." So we've actually been given dominion over this wonderful planet that we're on and that we're experiencing our spiritual journey on. In the beginning of our time on this planet, we have had the duty to take care of our home. Today we hear about socially responsible businesses. And sometimes we see businesses not necessarily make the right decision, but definitely their heart is in the right place. Over the last year or so, we've been having a concern in this country about race relations, especially with regard to law enforcement. Some of you might have remembered that Starbucks was trying to start a social responsible program of encouraging conversations about race. And even though that didn't pan out, definitely their heart was in the right place. But are we socially responsible individuals? We can be socially responsible where we work at. In Unity, we believe that we are one with all of our brothers and sisters. Our oneness goes beyond the human race. We are also one with all living things on this planet. We are also one with the universe, because we are just a small speck in the universe. But nonetheless, we are one with that inherent power of God that exists in each and every one of us. In living the examined life, it is important to consider how our actions may affect other living things. Are we careful how we dispose of litter? That's a good example. It's easy just to throw something on the ground, a wrapper or something on the ground. When we think about the importance of having a livable and a sustainable planet, I know there's been a couple of books out written in the last few years about what happens to all one of the books calls it Junkyard Earth, or Junkyard Planet is the name of the book. And a few years ago, some of you may have seen in the news, there was a barge going up and down the Atlantic coast trying to find a place to dispose of all the garbage and the waste that people had accumulated in one state. This barge couldn't find one state willing to let them to dump their junk, so to speak, even if they were willing to pay the state. But that just tells you that we need to be ecologically responsible, and we need to take a look at how our actions can affect the sustainability of our planet. How do we treat animals? There was that was released the other day of someone kicking a dog. Wasn't a very nice picture. It wasn't a very nice video. I've shared with some of you that I took in a stray cat a few months ago, and I felt that was my obligation, because I didn't want one of those nice cats. When she came in, there was a snowstorm going on outside. She was totally white when she came in the house, and she's brought a lot of joy. She brought a lot of joy into my life. But we might do it in another way. We may not have the resources to, necessarily to pay for a pet. But you can feed the birds outside, you can feed the squirrels. There's all kinds of things that we can show that we love animal life. Do we use products that are ecologically safe and that promote a healthy environment? These are different things that we can do to be socially responsible. We are blessed to be the only living beings that can reflect on our actions. We rise in levels of consciousness when we act in ways that honor this school, which is planet Earth, that we inhabit. At the beginning of this message, we explored the quote from Socrates about the unexamined life not being worth living. A happy and successful life is only possible when we reflect how our actions affect others, our planet, and our universe. And it's actually the first step to making major changes in our life. We are at sort of ground zero or step zero if we aren't reflecting on what we need to do. As we go forward, let's examine our life in treating others with love, living an ethical life based on the care of others, and living a socially responsible life as we honor our loved ones and everyone else and all living beings and the grand universe that we are a part of. By doing so, we have shown that we are living the examined life. Namaste. Exhale any tensions or concerns you may have about the day. And you want to make sure your feet are firmly planted on the floor in front of you. And you want to gently close your eyes if you have not done so already. I see the dawn of a new day. My life is a reflection of my consciousness. If I'm feeling not satisfied with the circumstances of my life, I don't linger in disappointment or discouragement, but rather I rejoice in the discovery that I can change my life by shifting my consciousness. If I don't like the film that is playing, I can change the reel. To shift my consciousness, I examine my beliefs. Do I believe I am deserving and loved? Do I believe I am one with God? I discard any unsupportive self-talk and affirm I deserve all the good God has for me. I am whole, confident, and strong through the power of God within me. I repeat this practice until my consciousness shifts and I see the dawn of a new day. I open to the full expression of God in me. At one time I may have felt lost and alone, believing that I was separate from God. I may have believed I was not worthy of God's good. Yet as I open to the presence of God within, I realize my inherent worthiness and that God supplies my every need. The challenges and circumstances of my life may change, but God within is unfailing, steady, and strong. Through this meditation, I bring awareness to all that I am in God. I focus on my breath and observe what is happening in my body and emotions. And now we go deeper as we enter the silence and open ourselves to the full expression of God.